Apologies first and foremost to my regular viewers for my absence recently. I was moving, that's the new background behind me. Got food poisoning, got hit by a deer, and a lot of other terrible things happened in the past couple weeks, so things have been a little bit slow. But we're back at it again, hopefully going to be getting you guys a lot more material pretty soon. So as I've alluded to before, since we've completed our work on Genesis 1, the creation story, I want to move on to Genesis 2 and 3, which is the Adam and Eve story, or more accurately, I think, set of stories regarding Adam and Eve. There's a couple other small minor stories that are all kind of brought together into this narrative. It's going to make more sense in time. The point is I'm working on that material, and we're not quite ready to have the big Adam and Eve video just yet. So in the meantime, I wanted to bring up a kind of smaller topic which I don't see asked a whole lot in either Christian or non-Christian circles. And that question is, where is or was the Garden of Eden? I think the reason this question isn't asked a whole lot is because we have this idea that the Garden of Eden story takes place so far in the distant, perhaps even mythic past, that there's basically no hope of recovering the original location that the story took place in. But what's interesting is that the biblical authors actually seem to clothe the Garden of Eden story in language with a particular place that was known in the ancient world, or at least that's what I'm going to suggest today. So where is or was the Garden of Eden? Well, the first clue is the fact that the Garden of Eden isn't the entire area known as Eden. In Genesis 2:8, it says that God plants a garden in Eden. It doesn't say that the whole region of Eden or place where Eden is the Garden of Eden. It says that God plants a garden in a place called Eden. Not only that, but the text simply says God planted a garden in Eden. It doesn't say God planted a garden in a place called Eden, or in the land which is known as Eden, or something of that nature. It says in Eden. And that seems to suggest to me that the audience would have been familiar with where Eden is. It would be like if I said I have a basketball game in Chicago. When I say in Chicago, you know that I'm saying a city that I expect you to be familiar with. And if you're thinking that there is no nation called Eden or a region called Eden today, you'd be correct. But we also need to remember that the ancient Israelite words for other nations aren't the same as the ones that we use today. For example, the Israelite term for Egypt is Mitzrayim, and the ancient Israelite term for the land of Greece is Yavan. These sound nothing like the modern names for those places, but that's because this is 3,000 years ago that these terms were being used, and by a people who didn't live in those places. So just because the place is called Eden doesn't mean that there isn't or wasn't a place called that in antiquity. The best contender for locating Eden in the ancient world is actually the region that we call today Lebanon. In fact, the term Lebanon is actually a very ancient term for this area. The connection between Lebanon and Eden is actually made in the Bible itself, not in the book of Genesis, but in the book of the prophet Ezekiel, who refers to the king of Tyre in relation to the trees of Lebanon and the greatest of the trees of the garden of God in Eden. In a previous passage, Ezekiel, speaking about the king of Tyre, a city in modern-day Lebanon, says, "You were in Eden, the garden of God." So the prophet Ezekiel, writing in the post-exilic era, seems to draw a connection between the region of Eden and the region known in the ancient world and in today as Lebanon. Now this theory does hit a little bit of a snag when it comes to geography, because in Genesis 2:8 it says that God plants a garden in Eden in the east, and the region of Lebanon, even being very generous, it is technically east of ancient Israel, where the author of this story was presumably writing from, but it's more so north than east. But this objection isn't actually that clear-cut. In Genesis 28:1, Jacob leaves his family in Canaan and travels east to the city of Haran. And the city of Haran, like Lebanon, is actually further north than it is east of the ancient land of Canaan or Israel. Interestingly enough, the city of Haran is actually located right next to modern-day Lebanon, so if Jacob is traveling east and he's leaving Canaan to go to Haran, it might provide a parallel to the idea of kind of going in a northeasterly direction to arrive at this location. Eden being located in Lebanon actually explains another section of text, which is the story of Cain and Abel, because it says that after Adam and Eve were exiled from the garden, they traveled east a ways, and after Cain kills Abel and is banished from human society, he travels east and becomes the builder of the first cities. So Cain has a reputation as being the ancestor of city builders, and the people who were known in the ancient world for building the first cities and placing emphasis on organized structure and civilization were the Mesopotamians, who would be located directly east of modern-day and ancient Lebanon. The cedar forests and mountains of Lebanon were also thought to be the location where divine beings lived in a lot of ancient literature. In the Old Babylonian version of Gilgamesh, for instance, the cedar forest to the west, probably Lebanon, is referred to as the secret dwelling place of the gods. The cedars of Lebanon, the cedar trees which grew in this particular region, were also thought to be of exceptionally high quality and were valuable for use in building temples. This shows up especially in Phoenician texts like the Ugaritic Baal cycle, and it also may have reference in the Gilgamesh epic itself, as Gilgamesh and Enkidu chopped down cedar trees to bring back home to Uruk. Most famously, in the Bible itself, the cedars of Lebanon were used in the construction of the Temple of God in Jerusalem. They were donated by Hiram, the king of Tyre, to Solomon, who used them in the construction of the Temple of God. So the cedars of Lebanon were very high quality, and they even had a reputation of being associated with deity and appropriate materials for the construction of divine palaces. So where did the author of Genesis 2 imagine that the Garden of Eden story takes place? It's hard to say. There's a lot of different scholarly opinions on where the Garden of Eden story took its imagery from. I would suggest that the region generally of Lebanon is a good explanation of this, although it isn't a perfect one. For instance, the Genesis story suggests that the headwaters of the Tigris, Euphrates, and two other rivers that we no longer have any record of flow from this area. That technically doesn't line up perfectly with the region of Lebanon, but you also have to wonder how much the Israelites knew about where the headwaters of those areas actually were in the ancient world. Other suggestions have been modern-day Armenia, ancient Mesopotamia, and pretty much everywhere in between, but just given the language that we find in the Bible and elsewhere, I think Lebanon makes a good example of it. If it sounds weird that God would plant a garden in a place known for its massive sprawling trees, then don't worry, you're not alone. That is kind of weird. But it should be noted that the things that God causes to grow in the Eden story are fruit trees. Fruiting trees, which are pleasing to look at and good for eating, are specifically the type of plants that God causes to sprout here. So even though they're not cedars, they're producing fruit which is edible for humans, nevertheless the primary thing growing in the Garden of Eden are trees. I've actually opted in my translation work to represent this as the Orchard of Eden, rather than the specific Garden of Eden, which kind of brings to mind more the idea of, cultivating tomatoes and crops out of the ground. The emphasis in the Garden of Eden story, both for the common fruits that Adam and Eve were allowed to eat, and the particular fruit which they were not supposed to eat, are all on fruits of trees. Trees, again, being kind of the primary idea here. So I just wanted to record a quick little video to kind of give you guys something. Again, I'm working on some big stuff with the Adam and Eve story. There's a lot more than I expected, and unsurprising to anybody, translating through one of the most primeval stories of human origins isn't exactly simple. So the translation work for the first episode is done. I'm working my way through commentaries and secondary materials, and hopefully I'll have a new video for you guys soon. I am going to parse it out into a couple of different videos. I feel like in the last one I kind of clumped everything together, and it was just a lot to kind of work through and metabolize based on the feedback I got from a couple of friends. So I'm going to parse some things out by topic here, and so hopefully it's going to allow me more time as well to produce videos and get them out there while I'm doing research for the next set of projects after this. So stay tuned, more to come, take care of yourselves, and don't get hit by a deer, because believe it or not, they refuse to give you their insurance.